If everyone's ready, we'll get started. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Jackie, work with Caswell County Community Development, and this is Melissa Kreider, also with Community Development, will be moderating the meeting this evening. As you'll see, it's more of a workshop than it is. It's not a committee meeting. It's not a meeting of the board. Our intent tonight is to gather any additional information that people wanted to present that should be considered as an inclusion, deletion, any modifications of the winter solar ordinance. We know that when the county board adopted the ordinances due to the time constraints that we needed to back in May, that there were still some items that individuals wanted considered, so we want to make sure that we at least have the opportunity to consider those now. So the purpose of the meeting tonight is again to go over a few of the items. Again, we're going to high level touch on everything. If you aren't informed of some of these items, I think most of you probably are, with regards to either the state or the local ordinance. We will have the links provided. We do have emails, I believe, for most people. If you haven't provided an email and you do want that information, please make sure to sign in before you leave, and we'll send you the actual presentation from this evening. Again, it's not going to include everything. It's just a touch on some of the high-level items. So again, we're going to review a few of these items. We're going to discuss the public hearing process, some key definitions, setback, height, sound, public input. That's when we'll call on anybody who is signed in here to speak. And again, we'll have you give a 3 to 5 minute kind of summary of what it is you would like to see deleted, modified, included. That will then be presented to the Land Use Committee on September the 12th to discuss and see what are viable options to then send to public hearing. Then in October, that would be on the 3rd. Then lastly, we'll touch on next steps, which I just briefly touched on, but more specifically in dates. So with regards to Public Act 102-1123, which again, most of you are familiar with, again, I'm not going to read this verbatim. These are not verbatim. We could adopt items with regards to wind, energy, and solar facilities, but we couldn't adopt anything that was more restrictive than what the state gave us guidelines to adopt. With regards to that, we also couldn't adopt anything, the installation of the wind energy facilities, commercial energy facilities, unless it complies with what the state had stated. So again, just very briefly stating, if you're familiar with what the state had, that's what we had to come in compliance with by the May date that we discussed. Just a couple other items. Fees had to be in line with any fees that were similar. We couldn't condition anything based on valuations, and we couldn't adopt regulations that disallowed permanently, temporarily any of the energy facilities, and any area that was zoned to allow for agricultural and industrial are the areas that we have to consider viable areas. So in our ordinance, we define that as any industrial districts and agricultural districts. As far as public hearings go, before granting a siting approval, which would be a permitted approval or a special use modification of a prior siting or special use approval, the county board or the zoning board of appeals should hold at least one public meeting. That public meeting had to be compliant with the Open Meetings Act and held within 45 days of the filing of the application. Interested parties are given the opportunity to examine the witness or the facility or developer, facility owner or developer. At the public hearing, the county would then have to render a decision within 30 days upon conclusion of the public hearing. As most of you know, the Agricultural Impact Mitigation Agreement is now a condition of the public hearing and must be submitted prior to. That's not to say that we will always have that in hand at the time that the application is submitted, but it's the due diligence of the applicant to make sure that they have that prior to the actual public hearing or request a continuance. Test towers may be permitted without formal approval. Some of the key definitions I think that were touched on in prior hearings are the definition of an occupied community building, which would include a school, place of worship, daycare facility, public library, community center. Participating properties are the properties that are subject of a written agreement between the facility owner and the real property, provided the owner an easement. Participating residence is a residence located on participating property that is existing and occupied on the date that the application is filed. Non-participating property, real property that is not a participating property, option, lease, or license to use the real property for the purpose of constructing a commercial facility or supporting facility. Non-participating residence would be just that, residence that is not located on a participating property. Supporting facilities would include transmission lines, substations, access road, met towers, storage containers, and equipment associated with the generation and storage of the electricity by the commercial facility. Solar setbacks, this would be the state of Illinois in compliance, Tazewell County. So with regards to solar, occupied community buildings and dwellings on non-participating properties have to be 150 feet to the nearest point of the outside wall. Participating property boundary lines, there is no defined setback. Public road right-of-way, 50 foot from the nearest edge. Non-participating properties, 50 foot from the nearest point of the property line to the non-participating property. Non-participating dwelling, 150 feet from the nearest point of the outside wall of the structure. With regards to wind, and I know this is redundant for some of you, so I do apologize. Participating residence is 1 1/10 to the outside wall, not less than. Occupied community building, not less than 2.1 to the nearest point of the outside wall of the structure. Overhead transmission lines, not less than 1.1 times measured to the center point of the easement. Public right-of-way, not less than 1.1 from the public right-of-way. Participating properties, not less than 1.1 from the property line. Participating residents, non-participating residents, not less than 2.1 from the nearest point on the outside wall. And then you have the fish and wildlife areas and protected lands, and that is 2.1 times the nearest point to the property line of any of those areas. Oops. Height restrictions, that would obviously have to do with both wind and solar. Height restriction for wind, again, Tazewell County being compliant with the state of Illinois. The county may not set a blade tip height limitation that is more restrictive than the height allowed under determination of no hazard to air navigation by the FAA. Solar would be, again, compliant with the state of Illinois, that the solar panel has a height no more than 20 feet above ground. Sound restrictions are compliant with the Illinois Pollution Board as per the state of Illinois. Does anyone have any questions? Again, we just hit on some really high points of things that we heard a lot about. There's obviously a lot more information in there, and we will be happy to provide anyone with the links to that. Again, via email, we can provide the whole presentation, but again, the detail is going to be in the links to both the county ordinances as well as the state. So with regards to public input tonight, we asked for a 3 to 5 minute summary of any of the inclusions, deletions, or modifications that you are requesting be considered by the land use committee. We do have, it would look like 5 land use committee members here this evening. They will not be participating in conversation because this is not a committee meeting. They're here to hear what you have to say. They may reach out to you independently if they have questions or concerns about something that you have said that they would like to then take back to their peers at the land use committee meeting. If you have not done so, please make sure that your name, address isn't as important as a phone number and email address on your written documentation. Please be as specific as possible if you had some information to add, but this is more or less just getting the nuts and bolts of what you would like to see again considered by the land use committee. Please try not to be repetitious.
Jackie, some of them did not have it written. They said give the procedure to get their comments written into you by.
Sure, so if you don't have in writing what your request is this evening, please make sure that we have it, and this will be at the end of the presentation as well. the zoning email address, you can submit that no later than Monday the 4th. That will give us the opportunity to get everything compiled into the amendment to take then to the land use committee. I'm sorry, it is on this slide. It's there at the bottom. Probably most of you already know what that is, or if you have an email address for myself or Melissa, you can submit it to us as well. That's fine. Again, that's no later than the 4th. That'll just give us the opportunity to get it all compiled, get it to the land use committee for them to take a look at prior to the meeting on September the 12th. We'll come back to the public input. Next steps will be, again, September 12th, the land use committee will meet at their regular meeting time, possibly in this room. We haven't defined that yet, but that'll obviously be posted. Excuse me. We will then have the land use committee have provided to them any of the changes that are being proposed. They will then discuss those and determine what is viable, what is not in the eyes of the law, and when it comes to Tazewell County, what is best for the citizens. Then they will send any of the items that they feel are viable options to amend to public hearing. That will be the ZBA hearing that will be held on October the 3rd. Again, that's the regular ZBA hearing. So that would be a county proposed amendment to either the wind or the solar ordinance. Following that hearing, there will be a recommendation by the Zoning Board of Appeals, and then those items will also go back to the Land Use Committee, who will then make a recommendation on those amendments to the Tazewell County Board. That meeting will be October 10th. Final decision of any of the amendments will be by the County Board on October 25th, 2023 at 6 p.m. in this room. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so we will go back to the public input portion. Following this meeting, like I said, we're going to compile any of the written statements as well as we are recording the meeting. So the recording will also be given to the Land Use Committee members to review, just to make sure that what we're receiving in writing is what is also being conveyed verbally, just to make sure we don't miss anything. And again, they'll be provided with all of your contact information, so if someone speaks this evening and they have questions about then what they see in writing versus what they heard in the recording, they will reach out to you directly, and then they can take that information back to their peers at the Land Use Committee meeting. So we will start with the list. It does look like we have a handful of individuals that look like they've got something written in or to discuss this evening. So we will just start at the top of the list. Again, if you indicated that you want to speak, that's who I'm going to call on. If you're on the list and you don't want to speak, and then that you find that there is something that you do want to include, just let me know after we've gone through the list. So first on the list to speak this evening is Brad Long.
Where would you like me?
Here at the podium, please.
My name is Brad Long. I was employed in the insurance industry in excess of 39 years. I was a professional insurance broker for over 28 years, which means I worked with clients to develop insurance programs that would protect their assets. My primary clients were commercial grain elevators, chemical and fertilizer retailers, feed manufacturers, and seed companies. I'm currently retired from that employment and from the insurance industry and reside and farm in Tazewell County. Liability insurance, just a brief, what I'm going to discuss is liability insurance and the need to have higher liability insurance limits. Liability insurance in general is needed to protect the insured or the policyholder against claims or lawsuits that arise from the negligence of the insured, and protect third parties from damages caused to them by the policyholder. The policyholder in this case would be the WEX people, the owners and operators that constructed and owned the wind turbines. If the insured or the WEX are deemed negligent in a claim, then the insurance company is responsible for paying any damages caused to any third parties. An example might be, and this may be an extreme example, but as we know, generally speaking, we buy insurance for extreme things, not something that we expect to happen, but something that could be catastrophic and could cause damage. An example might be a wind turbine catches fire, and we've seen videos of wind turbines catching fire. In the middle of a dry cornfield south of Hopedale, Illinois. The wind is blowing from the south at 25 miles an hour towards Hopedale Medical Complex. Hopedale Medical Complex fiscal assets exceeded $39 million for their fiscal year ending in 2018. Obviously, this would be nothing compared to the potential loss of life that could occur in the event that the fire reached the facility. This would be an extreme example, but remember, insurance is purchased for exactly what you would not expect to happen to you. Insurance is purchased to protect against catastrophes. The current Tazewell County liability insurance requirements in the WEX ordinance is $5 million per occurrence and $10 million annual aggregate. $5 million per occurrence means the maximum amount of liability insurance for any one claim or occurrence is $5 million. The $10 million aggregate limit refers to the maximum amount the policy will pay for any number of claims throughout the policy period. So the guidelines right now is the max would be $5 million if there was an incident for that particular incident, and then $10 million for any number of incidents that would happen throughout that policy period. I believe the Tazewell County required insurance limits are not adequate. The limits noted do not apply to each wind turbine constructed. The limits apply to all turbines constructed within a project or under a project LLC name. So the number of towers that they put up, it's not going to apply just to that particular tower, that particular location. Many of my commercial agricultural insurance accounts, maintain insurance policies in excess of the limits noted in the current Tazewell County ordinance, and they did not have near the assets or footprint of the WEX. These WEX companies are huge multi-million-dollar companies. They can afford to purchase adequate insurance limits and should purchase adequate insurance limits, liability limits to protect the citizens of Tazewell County. I propose that the Tazewell County WEX ordinance require at least $10 million per occurrence and $50 million aggregate. Honestly, I'm not sure that's enough, but it would be significantly better than the current limits that are included in the ordinance. Thank you.
Next on the list is David King.
Good evening. My name is David King. I live at 1984 East Jefferson, Morton, Illinois. I've lived in Morton Township all my life. I do not currently live or farm in any of the areas that are being considered for wind energy. But that doesn't mean that I'm not a concerned citizen. It was just 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago that our area was considered for wind construction. I've heard of possible solar construction within approximately a half a mile of one of my farms. Some of my concerns can be addressed by some local zoning ordinances. First of all, I do not consider either a wind or solar collection facility anything like a farm. Therefore, I do not understand why most people are calling them wind or solar farms. Many of my other concerns have to be centered around some of the decommissioning processes. Who is ultimately responsible for holding wind and solar companies accountable? Is there an appropriate enforcement officer in place to hold them accountable? Speaking of the decommissioning process, companies are to pay money into an account for the eventual decommissioning cost. I would suggest that a large portion of that should be in the account before construction even begins. Again, who will hold that company accountable? There has to be some teeth put into the contracts, otherwise it will be useless to begin. Is that money held in escrow account in Tazewell County's ownership? I've had a lawyer several years ago tell me that this money should be in that account totally by day one of construction. There is and will be hundreds of excuses why it can be delayed. Do we already have this type of person on staff at the county level? Or is there need to hire additional staff? These rules or laws need to be spelled out in detail to make it very clear what is to be done. Who is going to come up with these rules and make it specific for Tazewell County? Is it the land use committee, the zoning permit office, or is it voted on by the whole board? Then let's say 25 years down the road, when winter solar project gets sold several times to other companies and the last one eventually moves out of the area or even out of the country. And then the funds needed to take the project down are not sufficient. Who's ultimately responsible for dismantling that project? Is it the landowner somewhat responsible? Has that person received much of the proceeds of the project? These are issues that the board and appropriate committees need to address. Thank you for your time, and I hope and pray that you and the board will have wisdom to discern what's right for all the citizens of this county. And I wrote an additional thing by hand that I didn't include in the email. Just a recommendation for the future. If you're having a meeting where you want input from citizens across the county, please do a press release so people can duly be informed. I've talked to hundreds of people. No, I didn't. I've talked to quite a few people. They had no clue this was going on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. Next on the list is Tim Bear.
Tim Bear, Tremont, Illinois. For tonight's comments, I want to reference my July Tazewell County Board comments where I proposed that residents living within 4,000 feet of a wind turbine installation should receive annual compensation for the degradation of their quality of life from the construction and operation of wind turbines. And I include solar installations in my comments as residents living within the same 4,000 foot radius are also negatively affected and should also receive annual compensation for the degradation of their quality of life. For the rest of my comments, I will refer to people living within this 4,000 foot radius as affected. The point of tonight's comments is to propose a reasonable amount of annual compensation that recognizes the degradation of the affected's quality of life. Obviously, this is a difficult number to arrive at, as no amount of compensation can adequately address what the affecteds must endure so that the public can benefit from their sacrifice. As a starting point for discussion, I propose that each residence within 4,000 feet of wind or solar installation should receive $1,200 annually. And I realize that the amount can be argued both ways from this starting point, but it is at least a fair starting point. An additional point to keep in mind is that most, if not all, of the affected would prefer to be left in peace and quiet rather than to get compensation for the degradation of their quality of life brought upon them by the installation and operation of wind and solar energy projects. But as these wind and solar projects are considered a public benefit, it is proper that wind and solar companies should pay compensation to those negatively affected by these projects. To conclude, I ask that the Tazewell County Wind and Solar Energy Ordinance be amended to address the concerns above stated. Thank you.
Jacob Zumwalt.
So I apologize in advance. I left my college statement at home. I'll be emailing the written part. I'm kind of shooting from the hip right now. So my name is Jacob Zumwalt. I reside at 19280 Toboggan Avenue, Delaware, Illinois. I would like to share my views on decommissioning and some ADLS and aircraft detection lighting systems. I feel like it should be common sense, but still important to share. I believe ADLS systems should be implemented to existing and new towers. From where I live, I can see flashing red lights from towers that are 15 plus miles away. I believe this is completely unacceptable. With technology nowadays, I do not feel like this is a tall ask. We were able to start-stop cars, turn on irrigations, open homes, all with the push of a button, and plus many other stuff. Even my 2010 Prius unlocks its doors automatically when I get in a certain proximity with the car. I'm no expert in technology, but I'm sure there is an added cost to these systems. But I am in favor for anything that will cause the least amount of disturbance as possible. I watched the Shooting Star event that happened earlier this month from my farmhouse, and all I could think about is how glad I did not have a bunch of surrounding blinking red dots taken away from that experience. These events don't happen often, and when they do, I try to enjoy it to the fullest. This might not be a big deal to some, but I believe it is for others. Anytime we can make anything the least disruptive as possible, I think we should try to excel at that. It's just the decent thing to do. I believe decommissioning is a huge area of concern for me, and should be, in my opinion, the responsibility for the wind companies and the landowners who sign the contracts. Not have the county or taxpayers any way or shape or form associated. Signing contracts comes with rewards of payments, but should also come with the risk of having the decommissioning responsibility. I see this as any other type of investment. If you truly believe in the sustainability of wind turbines and that they will last the test of time, then decommissioning should not be an issue. The county should not suffer if it does not play out that way. It is the responsibility of the landowner to make sure these companies are legit and cover their costs of decommissioning if things go astray. That should be considered before entering into any agreement. The landowner and company should bear that burden. With the reward of payments comes the risk. The county should not be possibly punished for someone else's speculation on the longevity of these projects.
Amber Toll.
Hello. I think you all know who I am by now. My name is Amber Toll. I grew up on a farm in Mackinac where I still farm with my family today, with plans to spend the rest of my life there. This means that I will work here, I will grow and raise my family here, and I plan to teach my children of the blessings that we have and how to respect the land that provides us a living. Prior to coming back to the farm full time, I studied agronomy and ag business, and I worked in corn and soybean research for over 8 years. I am no stranger to the valuable resources that we have today, and I care deeply for the land that I know we will not receive any more of. I am also the 4th generation of farmers on this same land. This takes dedication and a lot of hard work. My family has been farming the same land for over 100 years, which has rooted a genuine care for our property rights in me. This is also the case for many of my neighbors. However, not the wind and solar companies whose LLCs are often out of state and sometimes only months old. I am shocked how at every corner it seems that we must fight to maintain something that at one time seemed so fundamental. The American Farm Bureau Federation states that today's average American is at least 3 generations removed from the farm. Some sources say that the average is more like 4. We have also, by nature of farm succession, have more absentee landowners today than ever before. This reinforces the necessity that we ensure that we are taking a closer look at the long-term and day-to-day impacts these projects have on the land, the community, and the neighbors as a whole. The impact of wind and solar ordinances we are discussing today will have a lasting impact on generations to come in a variety of different ways. It's complex, I don't have all the answers, and we would be foolish to think that we know what's to come of wind and solar. This is why I believe it is in our best interest to take a conservative approach when it comes to these ordinances. There is no recourse of action for our mistakes. Farming has proven to be a sustainable industry in Tazewell County. It has been around for hundreds of years and it will be for 100 more. There is no doubt that we evolved in that time. We improve with technologies such as our seed and equipment. We implement new conservation practices, but fundamentally a few things have remained the same. First and foremost, we need our soil to remain viable and accessible. And American farm families cannot have their property rights stripped away from them. Over the last almost 2 years, I've spent a considerable amount of time researching all aspects of wind energy. Among that, I've dove into solar and into ordinances in general, and I've learned a lot. The ideas that I've presented to you throughout this whole process, as well as tonight, are not with the intentions of being more restrictive, but with the idea of being compliant with the state, as well as providing every bit of protection that we can to those who live within the footprint of an industrial wind energy plant or near industrial solar fields, promote long-term growth in Tazewell County, and finally, not overlook the items in which would inhibit the growth and advancement of agricultural and rural communities. A new project such as wind and solar should put no additional burden on the county. These are things that should be paid for by the developer and facility owners. It is, if at any point you think, oh, it may not be necessary, I want to remind you of a couple things. Anything is possible in the next 6 decades. The county is not going to be hurt by having extra protections and access to more information. And 2, success is built on the ability to do better than just good enough. There's no way that I could effectively present to you the suggestions that I have for the wind and solar ordinance in 3 to 5 minutes tonight, but I have prepared my research and I will share the complete document with you by email. As always, I'm available for follow-up questions by phone, email, or in person if you would like to have deeper discussion. I would like to close with a comment for UCTC. The United Citizens of Tazewell County as a whole has done a tremendous amount of research and provided the county board and staff with countless credible suggestions and resources. There is still abundant support behind this group, and I urge you to keep their suggestions on the table. Thank you.
Those were all of the individuals that we have on the list to speak, but I know there's a number more of you in the room. Is there anyone that didn't sign in that has something that could be considered a viable option or something that they want to bring forth that maybe hasn't been touched on yet?
Yeah, there's some people that just hand it in written or hand it written. Will they want to speak, at least give a summary of what they're submitting? Give an opportunity for anybody who just sort of submitting written.
Yeah, that would be up to them if they want to come forward and speak. If they'd just like to provide what they have in writing, they can do so this evening or email as stated by the end of the day on the 4th. And again, that will all be submitted to the land use committee to determine what's taken for viable options for public hearing. Linda? Yeah, if I can get a copy and if you want to pass me out, that's fine.
And while Linda's coming up, to to buttress what Greg just said, if you're really shy and you don't want to have anybody hear your voice, but you really care about editing or amending the ordinance, I'm sure Jackie wouldn't mind reading some of those comments that you have. Or if she's not, I would.
So it looks like there's about 8 pages here, so I'm not gonna read it verbatim. I think all the committee members received a copy. If they have any questions, they can reach out to Linda and ask her if she would like to give any more input or clarify anything for them. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak tonight?
Now, will Amber's be available online or how?
Anything that we receive, we will submit to the committee to review. So she sends that to me via email. We'll keep a copy of it in order to amend the ordinance, and then we'll also provide a copy to the committee. And Matt, you raised your hand. Did you want to come up and speak? Okay. So we have Matt Hoffman. He wasn't going to speak, but he's got something to say.
Hello, my name is Matt Hoffman. I live at 2049 Isey Road, East Peoria. I just want to make sure that the 127.23 state law that came into effect, that is, it says on there that all federal and state laws still apply. And I want to make sure that the LaSalle-Sinclair factor are still in play, that the county board does not deny that. It's been in effect for 60 years. Point number 2 I'd like to make, to talk about the project on Springfield Road and Isey Road. I think I gave you 3 good reasons why I think the project should have been denied. One was the Sinclair and the South factor. The ZBA and the land use denied it, using that those requirements. Number 2, I think it also 100% lowers the property value, because there'll be less people interested in looking at solar farms and a weed field and fence line and all that, the look of it. And the 3rd reason the project should have been denied is that East Peoria sent a letter from Ty Livingston and Mayor John Hall that they are not in favor of that project. I know it might have been, so those are 3 good reasons that I think that the county board should have denied the project. Moving on, I'll just have to say those items. I also am upset that the county board voted in favor of that project under a possible threat of a lawsuit or something like that, is what I'm hearing. I don't think anybody should have been, I call it, having a gun to their head for the vote. I don't know exactly what happened, but that's what I feel like. The 4th and final point that I'd like to make is I think there should be a written agreement between the county, the executive of that project, the owner of the project, Ms. Isley, and the solar company on the decommissioning requirements and other requirements that they are implying, because there was a possibility that the landowner could be the sole, holding the bag if the executive leaves or is no longer in charge of the project. She is probably no longer has knowledge of what he is agreeing to, and that just puts the county board and the Tazewell County taxpayers at risk of who's paying for the decommissioning. That's all. Thank you for your time.
Now, can I ask you a couple of things, just real quick to clarify? I know you were talking about a particular project, so I want to get back to the ordinances and just make sure that I captured what your concerns with the ordinances were, specifically the solar. Would have to do with the written agreement due to the liability of the property owner if the decommissioning was not.
Usually it's an owner of the property and the solar farm and the county knowing. The landowner on this situation has no knowledge of what's being agreed upon. And it's important that that person has some type of knowledge of all these requirements.
And are you saying that the county should have a copy of the written agreement between the facility owner and the property owner?
Yeah, that would be, that property owner has knowledge of all these requirements, because in decommission, the executive are not a 50-year agreement, it's usually a short-term agreement. And he can walk away too. There's too many people that can walk away on this project or change their name.
And then with regards to the 1.5 mile comp plan, just recognition of the 1.5 miles of any.
Yeah, I mean,
municipality.
I understand legally, East Peoria cannot tell Tazewell County to stop it. But yet, Tazewell County could have looked at that East Peoria is landlocked, and it's the best place for growth that they could, so they could have denied it by using East Peoria as the reason it was legal, couldn't legally, in my opinion, deny it.
And I think with every project that comes up and things like this that are brought up, the county is receptive to understanding and finding a better avenue. So I think that was something new that we came up against, or that the county came up against. So it is something that they've been considering how to manage items like that.
There is one other thing that I saw in the presentation, I don't have it in front of me, but it goes back to one of the slides, and I think it's a state requirement, that the solar farm can also build up to 150 feet or something of a neighboring house, but I have 3 acres. What if I want to put a garage or something on my edge of my property, and it's closer now to the solar farm?
Well, it would be the residence. So the primary residence doesn't have to do with the accessory structure. They're looking at the primary residence.
Right,
and they look at a setback.
but that, I don't necessarily agree with that. But
Okay.
you can't change it, we can't change it, so I understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay, well, I appreciate everyone coming. I understand the concern with regards to the press release. We tried to put this out the best way that we knew how right now as far as publication in the newspaper. We notified anyone that we had direct contact with to try and get the word out as best we could. Again, if you have individuals that you know still have concerns that they would like to be known, by all means have them submit their email to the department. If you want to sign the back and did not give us your email, we can send a slide with the slide deck with the attachments to go and review the ordinance if you're haven't thoroughly done so yet. I think it's important to understand that we do, we want to welcome renewable energy in Tazewell County, but we are concerned about, the concerns of the citizens and their safety and well-being as well are also, so that's why we want this open line of communication and always encourage you to come forward and let us know of your concerns. Anything from the land use committee as far as?
Thank you for your attendance and your ongoing participation and your additional comments and revisions. It's very appreciated.
And if anybody has any questions, give me a call at Community Development. I'm always there to talk about any of your concerns as well. Thank you everyone for coming.
I'd be really sad about it, I'm sure.